Theobald Mahler, a German, and an American, Edward Thompson, both obsessed with a desire to find fame as scholars of the ancient Maya. Both of them would go all out to be the first to discover the legendary sites of the Maya. As their successes increase, so does their rivalry. Yet they make vital breakthroughs for 21st century archaeology. Today's scientists continue the work of Mahler and Thompson with modern methods. Just as their predecessors did, they try to find out more about the mysterious Maya. Early 19th century scholars see Mesopotamia, Greece, and Egypt as the cradle of mankind. The pyramids of Giza in particular are regarded as proof of a high culture presumed to have been unique in the ancient world. In 1834, the American travel writer John Lloyd Stephens climbs the stony monuments of the pharaohs. Stephens has a much broader view of ancient cultures than most of his contemporaries. He has traveled to Egypt to compare the imposing structures of the pharaohs with some strange drawings from Central America left by Spanish colonists. Until that time, reports about pyramids in the jungle have been dismissed as figments of the imagination. If he was able to prove that structures of this nature did indeed exist in the New World, it would be a sensation. And 3 years later, in the midst of the dense Central American jungle, Stephens beholds fantastic temples. He triumphantly jots down in his diary, now it has been verified. The people who once dwelled on the American continent were anything but crude barbarians. He assumes that there are hundreds of temples concealed in the jungle. Stephens' discoveries change the accepted view of the ancient world, and they arouse a tremendous interest in archaeology, a science still in its infancy. In 1870, Theobald Mahler struggles through the jungle in the border regions of Guatemala and Mexico. His equipment weighs more than 200 pounds, since he is one of the first explorers seeking to photograph the fantastic Maya structures. He is hoping to achieve international recognition with his pictures, but first he has to reach the Maya sites, and that is easier said than done. He and his Indio helpers keep losing their way during their apparently endless forced marches through the rainforest and the mosquito-infested swamps. Mahler's imagination begins to play tricks on him. Mahler had come to Central America 5 years before as a cadet in Maximilian of Austria's Foreign Legion. 2 years later, after the dream of a Habsburg Empire in Mexico collapsed, Mahler disappears. He decides to follow in the footsteps of John Lloyd Stephens and to impress the world with fantastic discoveries, hoping to make a living from the proceeds of his photographs. Mahler frequently shows his Indio helpers the drawings of the mysterious palaces that Stephens had published, but the natives have never seen the gigantic structures. These are the pictures that infected Theobald Mahler with the fever of discovery. An Englishman, Frederick Catherwood, had accompanied Stevens on his expeditions and made these precise drawings. Catherwood was a pioneer of pictorial documentation, a forerunner of the photographic era of Maya discoveries. But neither Catherwood nor Stevens have left usable maps. Today's scientists use satellite technology to find the last undiscovered Maya ruins. While analyzing infrared photos, peculiar discolorations catch their eye. They often appear where ancient Maya cities are located. For example, in Tikal, in what is now part of Guatemala, once one of the most powerful Maya centers. Up to 100,000 people lived here in Tikal's great period of prosperity between 300 and 800 AD, when the Mayas developed their astonishingly accurate calendar and the mathematical concept of zero. Archaeologists have discovered the reason for the unusual discolorations on the infrared pictures of Tikal. The Mayas built their temples in limestone. The surrounding plants have been soaking up lime through their roots for centuries. This calcium compound dehydrates the leaves, which is why the plants near the Maya structures store more warmth than the rest of the jungle. It's only a slight difference in temperature, but one that can be detected with an infrared camera. Perhaps this method could be used to locate the suburbs of the city of Tikal, which the archaeologists are certain must exist. Tim Murthatt from Penn State University commissioned a private satellite company to take pictures of the area surrounding Tikal. For 2 years, he has been combining the methods used by NASA with conventional methods to track down the suburbs of Tikal.
What you try to do is find the best recipe of those various levels or layers of information. And at times we're working with 15 or 20 different levels taken from different aircrafts or from different satellites. And you try to find the best combination to first visibly identify features, but then also go out and be able to accurately predict where features will be.
Tim Murthatt tries to find the outskirts of Tikal with the help of remote sensing. The infrared method is one of the most important aspects of this procedure. Other data concerning soil conditions is added and compiled on a high-resolution map.
Remote sensing has been around since the middle 1960s with Landsat images, but it's only recently when we started to acquire the high-resolution images such as ICONOS and SPOT that we've been able to better manipulate them, especially when you're dealing with the canopy of the tropical rainforest, which makes it very difficult to see features that are on the ground. Things like radar and infrared really help you to penetrate the treetops in order to best see features that we can't see with our human eyes.
Even from a great distance, the impressive structures are proof of the might of Tikal's rulers. But how did the city rise to power? And how could Tikal remain one of the leading powers of the Maya Empire for over 1,000 years, despite the region's poor soil? The inhabitants of Tikal were skilled farmers, although the productive layer of soil is only about 20 centimeters here. That may be enough for about 20 years of corn planting, but it is no satisfactory explanation for a 1,000-year period of unchallenged domination. On one of the infrared pictures, Murthatt has spotted a possible Maya community about 10 kilometers to the northeast of Tikal. But unlike the satellite picture of the powerful Maya center, this image only shows individual spots of limestone, just a few square meters in size. it is not possible to determine whether these are actually Maya structures by simply looking at the monitor. Nevertheless, Murtha wants to investigate.
I've always looked at the ways that the Maya adapted to this environment, and Tikal in particular had a very large population, and people are still grappling with how they grew the crops they needed and how they maintained the water levels that they needed. I think, and I hope, we may find a little piece of that puzzle tomorrow.
The satellites provide the coordinates, but that's where the technology ends. Compared with their predecessors, modern scientists face another danger. Grave robbers roam the area around Tikal. That's why Murtha and his assistants are accompanied by a soldier. They have to be out of the jungle by sundown, so there's little time to find those suburbs. For over 1,000 years, the Maya dominated Central America, politically and culturally. Their priests preached from temples that seemed to reach to the sky. They were measuring the course of the stars and planets almost perfectly, at a time when Europe was sunk through the Dark Ages. Nevertheless, the collapse of the empire finally reached this so-called Manhattan of the Maya as well, and the jungle reclaimed what its dwellers had wrested from it with so much effort. The jungle hid the palaces for hundreds of years until they were rediscovered by the pioneers of Maya research.
¡Los palos!
Mensch!
That's good.
Teobert Mala has rickety towers built to get the best camera angles. The photographs are only usable if the tripod is kept as steady as possible. Mala needs long shutter speed, and he has no exposure meter. In order to visualize the huge dimensions of the architectural structures, he makes use of a trick which the artist Catherwood had also employed. Mala stages impressive scenes by placing his assistants in front of the ancient monuments. He uses 3 focusing cameras in 3 formats, 12 by 10, 12 by 9, and 10 by 8, which enable him to expose negatives as large as 30 by 40 centimeters. This is 19th century high-tech. Muller spends all his savings on making these photographs to fulfill his dream, to go down in history as the greatest documentarist of the Maya. Tim Murtha's team reaches the target area 2 hours later than expected. He only has an hour left to investigate the site and determine whether he interpreted the satellite pictures correctly.
Well, I think we got it. No mira muy grande, pero looks pretty good. It's about 6 meters tall. Oh, this is great. This is fabulous. That's a 6 meters. Como 7 meters. Okay, great. It certainly works, the satellite.
And there really is a Maya structure underneath this inconspicuous mound. But suddenly they realize Tim Murtha may be the first scientist to set his eyes on this site, but someone else was here before him. grave robbers.
Well, to both sides, I mean, there's big blocks, but no ceramics. It looks like there's at least 2 or 3 floors down there.
Without the aid of technology, looters have found the overgrown grave and cleaned it out. Still, Mirth is satisfied, because the satellite was even able to detect this small, lost structure, and the mound is obviously part of what they are looking for, Tikal's outskirts.
I think the most important thing about today's work is that we've identified a dense and significant population where people previously thought there were no sites and no people living. And that's important for Tikal because we're starting to better define the city of Tikal. And finding places like this allows us to better understand the relationship, something that is 8 kilometers away and near the defensive earthworks, how they interacted and when they were a part of Tikal's political organization.
The inhabitants of the outskirts most probably provided water for Tikal. Their dwellings were located closer to the lakes and swamps used as water reservoirs, and that, in turn, was the reason the city was able to flourish and become a powerful Maya center. Mirth's pictures find their place in a historical photo album that began with Theobert Mahler's photographs. Mahler's pictures are still the most important source for archaeologists in Tikal. In some cases, it is only possible to visualize how the site really looked by consulting his photos. This stele has suffered greatly in the last decades, as has the limestone of many other structures. 150 years ago, explorers were more interested in making discoveries than explaining them, and it was particularly important to be the first to discover a site. Theobert Mahler knows that more and more adventurers are going to follow the call of the ancient Maya civilization. So Mahler goes plunging on through the jungle. He's especially unsettled by news of an American archaeologist who is traveling through Mexico as a consul. Edward Herbert Thompson from Massachusetts has originally gone to Mexico to explore what he presumes to be a link between the Maya and the inhabitants of the legendary city of Atlantis. He quickly realizes that his fantastic theories don't hold up. Yet he's so fascinated by the architecture of the Maya that he decides to stay on. His approach, however, differs greatly from Theobert Mahler's. Thompson is a shrewd businessman. He quickly finds private investors to support his expedition. In addition, he's on the payroll of various American museums. He even convinces the American State Department that his presence in Mexico might be useful and is allowed to sport the title of consul. That amateur archaeologist from Yankee Land is what Theobert Mahler, who financed everything himself, mockingly calls Thompson. To Mahler, Thompson is a red rag to a bull, but the rivals' paths have not yet crossed. Mahler has widened his scope of interest to include the entire Maya Empire, whereas Thompson is focusing on the Yucatan Peninsula. Their first encounter takes place in 1900 in Merida, where a small group of explorers regularly meets for tea at the home of a wealthy Mexican lady. Mahler is actually the leading archaeologist in the group, and he has announced that he would be showing photographs of his last expedition.
You see these drunks out
But as he enters the room, All his colleagues, as well as the hostess, are hanging on the words of Edward Thompson. Mala has never seen the American before, but the way the man presents pictures of the Maya city of Labna leaves no doubt. It had to be Thompson.
This is fascinating.
When I took these photos, I was stung by a mosquito this big. You don't believe me.
This is fantastic. How many times have you been there, Consul?
Oh, I've been there many times. The tunnel kind of became my second home.
Haven't you come here to look for Atlantis, Mr. Thompson?
The legendary Mr. Mahler. Why don't you give us the honor to listen to your theory about Labna?
I will tell you exactly why. Because I discuss scientific theories with scientists, and not with amateurs!
In the following years, a fierce conflict develops between the two explorers. Mala starts writing angry letters to the Mexican government, complaining about Thompson. He deserves to be captured and locked away in an asylum for observation. He is waging the vilest war against me and trying to claim responsibility for the magnificent results of my expeditions. The accusations leave Thompson cold, but he does have his own opinion of Mala. Mr. Mala looks like a ghost. He has that typical German stubbornness and is constantly filling himself with quinine and arsenic in preparation for another expedition next season. Both men are driven by the wish to be the first explorers to discover important ruins and announce their fabulous finds to the world, a concern which wasn't alien to other pioneers of archaeology either. When a pyramid is uncovered in Honduras in 1870, the discoverers can't believe their eyes. Steps lead to the top of the Pyramid of Copan, and every stone reveals a complex system of hieroglyphs. This is the longest Maya text ever found. The explorers of the era sensed that the signs could tell them something about the city, but they are unable to decode this giant crossword. Since then, generations of scientists have been trying to get the staircase to talk. David Stewart, who has been exploring Copan for 20 years, was the first to succeed.
It was in the late 1980s that it became clear to me that history was all over the staircase. And this was really about the kings, the dates of their inaugurations, the dates of their deaths. And so, you know, it became very clear to me then, and I was very excited that we could take some information from other sources and combine it with lots of information potentially from here and write the whole story of Copan's history. It's like reading an official history. It's in stone, but it has all of this information about all of the kings. So it's like a textbook, a history textbook, maybe with some dry information and dry facts, but for those of us in Maya archaeology who are interpreting the city, we need those facts as a foundation.
After the inhabitants had left the city in 800 AD, an earthquake shattered the staircase. Early explorers put the staircase back together again, but they couldn't read the signs. So the stones were in chaos. When David Stewart began his work, there were only 2 steps still together that made sense. Stewart is now rearranging the blocks, but he doesn't have to resort to heavy lifting. With the help of image editing software, He moves the inscriptions around until cohesive texts emerge from the individual symbols. That way, Stewart is able to extract more and more information from the staircase.
The king who first designed this space, he did it to honor his father. And his father had died, he was a new king, and he wanted to do something that was unique, apparently. His father was a very famous man. And one gets a sense of the personality, almost, of that son who had come to office, who was trying to live up to, I think, some certain expectations to a legacy of his father.
The staircase sheds light on one of the longest-lasting Maya dynasties. Stewart was able to read that the year 426 AD saw the birth of a dynasty that continued without interruption for 400 years, until about 830 AD. The 16 rulers of the Copan dynasty are depicted on the so-called Q altar, chiseled in stone. They symbolically pass on the ruler's scepter. It goes from one king's hand to the next until it is finally handed back to the great Yash Kukmo, who founded the dynasty 1600 years ago.
All of the kings of Copan seem to have been thinking about the founder as an important source of their own power. They were always talking about Kinich Yash Kukmo, trying to derive their authority from his, because he was the one who established this place as a powerful ritual and probably economic center in the 5th century.
Copan's meteoric rise began 200 years later in 650 AD. Its territory expanded to make it the most powerful single force in the Maya Empire. An abundance of inscriptions and sculptures, unique in the entire realm of the Maya, adorn the ancient city and prove Copan's elite was highly literate. There are signs chiseled everywhere, faces staring at the visitor, a universe of mysteries. The code of most of the hieroglyphs has been cracked by now. News from a bygone world. A world to which the first explorers had no key. Teobert Mala has documented nearly 100 Maya sites by now. He has hacked his way through the jungle, ridden horses, and paddled canoes to draw and photograph more and more temples and palaces. He has converted the ceremonial chambers of the Maya into his own living room and study. For months, he lives amidst the ruins. But he isn't able to make that one major breakthrough and discover a significant new site. He couldn't possibly have known that here in Palenque he is just a few meters away from probably the most spectacular discovery of the Maya Empire. Inside the Temple of the Inscriptions lay the body of a king. It wasn't until 1951 that archaeologists managed to dig a tunnel to the bottom of the pyramid. At a depth of 25 meters, they uncovered the grave of the most powerful ruler of Palenque, Pakal. He ruled for 70 long years and had his architects build fantastic structures. The latest research has discovered, however, that Pakal didn't only have remarkable architects. He also had engineers who were far ahead of any other culture in Central America. Tourists tramping across the site may not even notice, since the results of the engineering skills of the Maya lie underground. Palenque is laced with a system of canals which has hardly been explored. American archaeologist Kirk French was one of the first to go underground and examine the canals.
Palenque deals with 3,500 millimeters of rainfall a year, and the majority of that happens in a 7-month or 8-month period. And so there's massive amounts of flooding that would occur. And without these aqueducts, the water would, as it runs out of the mountains and it slows down as it hits this flat level area, and what would happen is the water slows, it's going to swell and spread out.
Palenque's particular location turns the few tiny streams that exist in the dry period into hundreds of brooks and rivers during the rainy season. The center of the town was regularly flooded. Water threatened Palenque's most important temples, and the royal palace on the Great Square, too. So Pacal's engineers came up with a brilliant idea. They relocated the rivers underground. That way, they not only got the flooding under control, but Palenque was now also equipped with an underground water supply which, in addition to the temples of the elite, served normal households as well. By covering the canals, they gained 25% more space, urgently needed for the construction of their elegant palaces. The more so since Palenque was a booming metropolis. The city became a major local power and a close ally of mighty Tikal. The basis for the city's rapid rise was provided by Palenque's engineers and their ability to regulate the mass of water. After exploring the underwater canals in the center of Palenque, Kirk French now wants to examine the outskirts. He hopes that the water system developed for common households beyond the great squares and temples will reveal new information about the life of those Maya who were not part of the city's elite.
Overall, we know very little about the Maya. One reason is because, even though we know how to read their hieroglyphs now, their hieroglyphs never mention common people. It only speaks of the elite. So we know very little of what common people did every day. Now you compare that to the Greeks or the Romans, things like that. We have books, we have all these texts that say how much taxes people paid, what they did on a day-to-day basis. We know very little about that when it comes to the Maya.
The reasons for Palenque's decline are also very unclear. The final calendar inscription was scratched on a broken piece of clay in the year 799 AD. The so-called Paris of the Maya fell into a deep sleep, from which it only awakened when 19th century explorers rediscovered it. In 1877, Teobert Mullis spends months in the city. He fills long nights writing in his diary, several hundred pages in all. Of his adversary, he has heard nothing for ages. Had Thompson finally given up? In fact, things have been unusually quiet in regard to the American consul, but not because he had retreated. On the contrary, in order to be as close as possible to the Maya city of Chichen Itza in Yucatan, he has bought a hacienda not far from the historical site. The estate has changed owners for the giveaway price of $75. Scientifically speaking, Thompson couldn't hold a candle to his rival Mahler. The American has realized that years before, but American museums are scrambling to get their hands on Thompson's finds. Thompson expects to make a big haul amidst the ruins of Chichen Itza, and there is a particular reason why. Thompson has carefully read the reports of Bishop Diego de Landa, who described the heathen rituals of human sacrifice practiced by the Maya. Bishop de Landa ordered Maya writings to be burned in the 17th century, and so the knowledge of a great culture went up in smoke. For Diego de Landa saw the devil's work in the pictures and scripts of the Maya. In fact, the reliefs depict rituals that seem quite bizarre. The wife of a king pulls a thorn-studded string through her tongue. By inflicting pain on themselves, the Maya attempted to achieve a state of trance in order to immerse themselves in the nether world of the gods. But de Landa's reports also repeatedly mention human sacrifice accompanied by valuable burial offerings. Until then, no explorer had followed up on the priest's writings until Thompson comes to Chichen Itza. He has the bishop's grisly tales in mind as he makes his way through the jungle. Landa had written, "It was the Indios' custom to throw valuable things into a well. They even threw in human beings who were still alive, particularly virgins, as sacrificial offerings to the gods. They actually believed those people wouldn't die, although they never saw them again." Thompson's mind is fixed on locating that sacrificial well. Diego de Landa had written of a well. This looks more like a pond. Thompson wants to determine the depth of the waterhole by using a bathymeter, but the plumb line never reaches the bottom. Thompson knows that the Mayas sacrificed their most valuable material offerings to Chak, the god of rain. In order to salvage the treasures he is expecting to find, he develops a bold plan. Now, scientists know that a gigantic meteorite hit the Caribbean Sea 65 million years ago, leading to formation of the so-called cenotes. Huge fragments broke through the limestone surface, opening passageways to the underground water reservoirs. Other high cultures scooped up water from the Nile, the Euphrates, or the Indus. The Maya had the cenotes. Beneath the limestone surface of the peninsula, there are thousands of water currents. To the inhabitants of eastern Yucatan, they were essential for survival. In the 9th and 10th centuries AD, the Maya Empire was plagued by a drought worse than any they had ever experienced before. Their once powerful centers became ghost towns. City-states attacked each other, and the wars over scarce resources failed to produce lasting victors. The Maya's living space shrank. Hundreds of thousands were on the move, all the way to the north of the Yucatan Peninsula. That is where Teobert Mala discovered the small town of Shikmok, which had apparently been overlooked by other explorers before him. Toward the end of the 10th century, living conditions in Shikmok had considerably worsened, and the town was abandoned. Shikmok had never been a large center like Palenque or Chichen Itza, but to Mala, the site is of enormous significance. No one else had been to as many Maya sites as Mala, but Shikmok was finally the place he was the first to discover. By now, he has broken off contact with most of his friends and acquaintances. He is only able to make ends meet with the money he inherited from his father. but that is also beginning to dwindle, and his photographs bring in hardly any revenue. He urgently needs a success. Mahler is exhausted, but Shikmok seems the hard-earned reward for his ordeals. Shikmok is his, alone. And then he finds them. Modern inscriptions on the wall. Once again, Mahler is not the first. The city has been discovered by someone else 3 years before. E.H.T.
Thompson!
The American is always a step ahead of Mahler, and not only on land. In 1904, Thompson becomes a pioneer of underwater archaeology in Central America. It has taken him 3 years to persuade American financiers to invest their money in Mexico's first underwater expedition, to the bottom of Chichen Itza's sacred cenote. After signing a document that he was diving entirely at his own risk, they finally gave him the money. His native helpers are certain Senor Thompson would never return. But he has left instructions to keep pumping no matter what happened. So they keep pumping. The lead soles of his shoes immediately pulled Thompson down to the bottom. He sustains damage to his eardrums, since equalizing the pressure by slowing down the descent is still unknown. But he doesn't give up. And 40 meters down, Thompson actually finds sacrificial offerings. He also finds human bones, and then the first skull. Bishop Diego de Landa had been right after all. Even 100 years later, the cenotes are still a challenge for divers, despite modern technology. It is now established that many of the cenotes are linked in probably the largest interconnected cave system in the world, which stretches for 133 kilometers. These inaccessible caverns have lots of scientific treasures in store for explorers. Bones and offerings have been preserved here for several centuries. And up till now, not even the grave robbers have dared to come here. An untouched time capsule. Though Thompson could help himself at random to the objects in the cenotes, there are now strict regulations. Objects and bones may only be salvaged if they are handed over to the experts from the Mexican Office of Antiquities. German archaeologist Dr. Vera Tiesler has been working in Merida for several years. She has examined thousands of bones from the cenotes. It turns out that de Landa's theory of the sacrificed girls is only partly true.
People used to think that virgins were sacrificed and thrown into the holy cenote. We now know, however, that this wasn't the case. The most dominant group is between 8 and 15 years old, but the victims who were sacrificed to the rain god were mostly male.
The most recent finds from Yucatan tell the experienced bioarchaeologists something new. There are signs that some human bones were worked on after the death of the victims. In religious rituals that scientists call treatment of the dead.
Die neuen Knochenanalysen haben wertvolle Erkenntnisse gegeben, nicht nur über
The new bone analyses have brought forth valuable findings, not only about the sacrificial offerings, but also about a large number of different treatments used on the dead. They range from lacerating and cutting up the body to the impact of heat in the form of incineration or boiling. And these different treatments give us valuable information about the reasons for ritual treatment of the sacrificial victims.
We still don't know why the largest Maya city in Yucatan became a center of human sacrifice. Perhaps because the Maya intermingled with other cultures that sacrificed more than they themselves did. The Toltecs came from faraway Teotihuacan, which is now located beneath Mexico City. It is possible that the Maya adopted their sacrificial rituals. At any rate, the Toltecs in Chichen Itza left amazing architectural monuments behind. Like the so-called Castillo, the war temple of the Kukulkan. Or the so-called Hall of 1,000 Columns. It is still not certain whether Toltecs were the last rulers of Chichen Itza, or mercenaries from Veracruz and Campeche in central Mexico. Nevertheless, even under its new rulers, Chichen Itza remained a ceremonial center until the city was abandoned in the 15th century. Chichen Itza is a real treasure trove for Thompson. For decades, he sends boxes of finds at regular intervals to North America. Now he intends to retire from Mexico. He is preparing his final shipment, his most valuable pieces. But there's someone who wants to stop him, with a vengeance. Teobert Muller is on his way to Chichen Itza accompanied by a Mexican inspector to ensure that Thompson is expelled from the country. The inspector, however, isn't completely convinced. After all, Senor Thompson is a consul of the American government. At Thompson's hacienda, Muller thinks he has caught his rival red-handed. He has received a tip-off that the American is about to smuggle his final consignment out of the country. During the course of his expeditions, Muller has taken photographs of some Maya sites before and after they have been visited by Thompson, and he has noticed that several ornaments are missing. Among them, a carved dragon head from Chichen Itza.
You are stealing the art of these great people! But now, Thompson, now it's over! Schluss aus Ende!
Mr. Muller, you have now accused me for a decade of taking artifacts out of this country. But let me tell you one thing. I respect the art of the Maya as much as you. But the things I have found are going to be safe in an American museum. If you leave them there, looters will take them and they will be gone forever.
The artifacts are not yours! And I think we leave it to the inspector to decide. Inspector, please. Go ahead and see what this man has taken from the ruins. Take a look at these photographs, especially, in particular, this ornament. Go ahead. I think this time there will be no way out.
You're right, I think we should leave this up to the inspector. Because I believe also in Mexico you're only considered a thief if you take something which is not yours. If you have a look at this contract, you may certainly understand that all the ruins of Chichen Itza belong to the property of this hacienda, which belongs to me.
However, a certified contract identifies Consul Thompson as the rightful owner of the estate, and as such, the owner of the entire Maya site of Chichen Itza.
You are not only a thief, you are a traitor!
Shall we discuss this further in a more civilized way? Please, over here. Por favor, después de usted.
Okay. Bueno, señor, muchas gracias.
Inspector.
Gracias, gracias.
Have a seat.
Difícil tratar con este hombre, ¿eh?
Rápido.
Señor Mahler. Conflictivo.
Conflictivo, you say.
Gracias, gracias. No es posible colaborar así.
At that time, Edward Thompson has excellent contacts with Mexico's rulers. Years later, the Mexican government sues the consul for damages amounting to $5 million. But by then, Thompson has already left the country. His hacienda is now an elegant hotel, and, as once before, it is a private individual who has bought the property. So the ruins of Chichen Itza are once again in private hands. Except that now, the owner is a Mexican. The Anthropological Museum in Merida commemorates the Maya explorer from distant Germany. But his bust has been relegated from the attractive exhibition rooms on the upper floor to the cellar. Thirbet Muller never had the satisfaction of learning that his arch-rival was sued. He dies in 1917 in Merida at the age of 75, bitter and unremembered. Muller was forgotten, but his photographs traveled around the world from one exhibition to the next, and they are still considered among the most valuable sources for Central American archaeology. Thirbet Muller was spared the humiliation of experiencing modern scientists seeing through his final trick 100 years later. Although Muller was by far the more notable explorer who helped to establish Central American archaeology as a science, he never got over the fact that Thompson was always one step ahead of him. So he forged a date on his drawing of the ruins of Shikmuk. That way it looked like he had discovered the Maya city before Thompson. Every archaeologist wants to be the first. There's no difference there between the adventurers of the past and the scientists of today. What has unified all generations of scholars is their fascination for a great people whose temples and palaces are, in part, still waiting to be discovered.